We acknowledge the Ancient Ones, the Greater Shamanic Council of Light, Hermes, Thoth, Trismegistus, and Seshet, Lady of the Measuring Cord, as above, so below, as within, so without. We acknowledge Imhotep, architect of the cosmos. May the earth be the mirror of heaven. We acknowledge the sacred order of the Magi, and all throughout history who knew, like now, a turning of the ages. We acknowledge the master builders of Göbekli Tepe and the great shining ones at Kalash. The courage and knowledge of the Polynesian wayfinders traversing the great oceans. We acknowledge the prophetic traditions of Ezekiel and Daniel, the traditions of Avalon, the Merlin, and the Round Table, the calendric wizardry of the Maya, and the Venus teachings from Mesoamerica, the Jupiter teachings originating in China, and the Vedic lunar mansion traditions, the Babylonian and Sumerian sidereal zodiacs, the brilliant Hellenistic invention of the seasonal zodiac. The Neolithic peoples around the planet, some still today, honoring the sacred connection between the land and the sky. The Tuatha De Danann in Ireland, who created a time of 2,000 years of peace, the builders of Newgrange. My teachers that are not in human form, Mount Shasta, the Grandfather Rock at the Wonderland of Rocks in Joshua Tree, Mount Haleakala on Maui, the Fish Lake Valley, Horophany, and the sacred landscapes around the planet, the astrosophy of Rudolf Steiner, and the esoteric astrology of DK in the Tibetan, both presaging the Shamanic Astrology Paradigm, and particularly the archetypal visions of C.G. Jung and the cosmology of my mentor, Dane Rajar. For these and more, we give thanks.
Well, hi everyone. This is Daniel Gemario here for the monthly full moon vlogcast. We have, I think, a very important topic for today. And joining me today to help me out with this and to dialogue with me about it is SAM's president, Mary Kern. And she has done some really great research, and also her help in creating the slides for this has been immense. So thank you, Mary. And so the purpose. Let's see the first slide there. And we can get into our topic for today, which is the movement of the nodal axis into new signs. One of the more important features of 2022. And there's so much in 2022, but this is one that we didn't want to leave behind. And over the years, we've tended to do like a teleclass regarding this, but so much is happening that we're doing it this way. It's the Vlogcast. So are you able to put that first slide up?
I am trying to do that as we speak. We've got that. Have it, and I've got one on top of the other. Screen share, we've got it. There we go. Are we seeing it?
I'm not. Here we go. Yes, so here we are. Lunar nodes moving into Taurus and Scorpio, January 18th, 2022 to July 18th, 2023. And there's a lot for us to cover. And we have the next slide there that here's the kind of things we want to cover. The intent of the collective and the personal initiation process involving the nodes. The 2022 nodal aspects, and then we'll be talking a bit about the meaning of the axis, Taurus-Scorpio axis. The difference between the global and collective intent of these processes that happen about every year and a half, and then how it works on a personal chart. So that, like if you yourself are in a nodal return, or you have these degrees of the nodes connected to your chart in some way. So we'll be looking at both how that works as far as the global transits, but also as you're tuning into what we covered today, see if you have aspects of your own chart that are connected to this process. And then the overall meaning of the 19-year cycle, the nodal cycle that we're talking about here. Let's just take a look at the chart for today. Or not today, but the exact point of the ingress into the North Node into Taurus, and there's the South Node into Scorpio. For those that are not familiar with how the nodes operate, they actually precess. So basically, when it goes into the next sign, it'll go into 2959, and then over a year and a half, it's going down in degrees. You can't help but notice, and I cannot help but point it out, that this is happening in a full moon window. I mean, today the full moon is happening fairly soon after this, but you'll also notice the Sun and Pluto are really close to each other, and also it's just at the point where Uranus will go direct. So there's a lot of amazing intensity that we could lose sight of the fact that the nodes are also moving into new signs. So you might wonder, so what in the world is the nodal axis? So why don't we go to that next slide?
Okay.
So if you think about this from a large view, the nodal cycles are really the relationship between the sun and the moon as we perceive it from the surface of the earth. And the one pathway is the ecliptic, and that's the path of the sun, but the moon's orbit kind of interweaves almost like a snake around that path of the sun. And when there is an intersection of those pathways, of the lunar pathway and the solar pathway, that's the intersection of the nodes. Now, beyond the scope of our conversation today is how that relates to eclipses, because should there be the presence of the sun or the moon at those intersection points, then you have the variety of different eclipses that can happen. But this particular kind of snaky interweaving of the path of the moon and the path of the sun, the way the ancients saw that, because they were looking at it, by story, telling stories about it or trying to represent it in a non-analytical way, and so they would see it as like the head of a snake or the tail of a snake, or the head of a dragon or the tail of a dragon. And I even found out when I was in Peru that they saw it differently. They saw it as a jaguar swallowing the sun or the moon. So you could represent it pictorially and story-wise that way. In India, they considered the nodes to be so important they considered them like planets. And I must say that in the Shamanic Astrology Paradigm, a huge emphasis is placed on the nodes, on the placement of the nodes. It's hugely important in the timeline. It's totally important in the transit cycles associated with it. Now, recently, actually, maybe let's take a look at the pattern of the nodes.
You're talking about
the thing from 19.
You got it. I got it up. Let me share it that way.
And we have this up here for research on how this operates over time. So we've created some tables here to show the North Node in Taurus and the North Node in Scorpio, because we're dealing with an axis. So always wherever the North Node is, the opposite is where the South Node is. And it is this pattern of less than 2 years, more than a year. And you can get a sense of it if you look at the North Node in Taurus, March 23rd, 1910, and then it jumps down to 1929, 1947, 1966, but then the opposite one also is the same 19-year pattern, meaning within its own domain, it's also this pattern, but it's in between. So like about every 9.5 years is like you see the 1910 and you see 1901. Now, interestingly, that also relates to what we have in our paradigm with the whole understanding of the nodal returns and the nodal reversals. So what we're looking at here is not how it would apply. Yes, thanks. That's what I wanted to go to next. That it not only, so this is how it applies globally as a world process, but then when you apply it to the lifespan of a human being, then we have these nodal return times and nodal reversal times. One of the great sources of inspiration for our paradigm is the work of Rudolf Steiner, and particularly when it became known as astrosophy. And boy, even in the Waldorf schools, they built into the structure of Waldorf education is actually an understanding of the nodal cycle. That's again beyond the full scope of our conversation today, but what I've come across is that their view of the archetypal lifespan of a human being was based upon the 4 nodal returns. And they were actually using whole numbers, 18, 36, 54, 72. And I think they liked to use 72 because they were really, like a lot of people, into numerology and number magic, and it's not lost on us, and it wasn't lost on them. 72 is 1 degree. 1 degree takes 72 years in the precessional cycle. All right. Now, my own view is that the archetypal lifespan of the human being is actually 3 Saturn returns, but this is still like a really important way of seeing the stages of life. And they loved to also look at how this related to organic life. So there's an average of 18 breaths in a minute, interestingly. 72 heartbeats in a minute. Obviously, this can be more or less, but we're talking about average. And so it's kind of like the human being as a microcosm of the macrocosm, and that the human being is like part of the fractal, the hologram that we find ourselves in. And the planetary cycles, the relationship between the sun and the moon, is connected to what our experience is. In our paradigm, this would apply to the first nodal return, the second nodal return, the third nodal return, and then the one that they have is the whole number 72. Now, in much the same way that in our approach, we use the actual, not the sort of symbolic number, but we really actually base it on the actuality of the time frame. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see what I mean. So I'm talking about where the 74, where oh yes, here, sorry. So the exact nodal cycles occur at 18.6, 37.2, 55.8 years old, and 74.4. But you can also see it as just as a general phase of life, where in the individual lifespan, there's a big change at between 18 and 19, between 37 and 38, between 55 and 57, between 74 and 76. I mean, this all goes into the material we cover in the shamanic timeline about these different phases of life. And our view of it on a personal chart level is alignment or realignment with original intent. Now, So the storyline for current life purpose is reiterated at those points. Or if at 18 to 19, 18.6, 18, you know, whatever numbers you want to use there, that is the completion of the adolescence and youth. And that's when you get the download as to, you know, potentially what your life purpose themes are. And then it's reiterated at 37 to 38, 55 to 56, 57, 74 to 76. And what we have in here is also the other lunar cycle that we weave together with this, also a relationship between the sun and the moon, which is the Metonic cycle, 19, 38, 57, 76. And the importance of that is when on a birthday, there is the exact reiteration of the angle between the sun and the moon. Now, so there's so much, I mean, there's all these cycles that are associated with this relationship between the sun and the moon. And, you know, in our, in this paradigm, the moon is like our lineage, and then we incarnate somewhere. And where we incarnate is like this, the sun, you know, our birthday, you know, we come into incarnation at that point. So this basic relationship between our past and what we're doing in the current life is represented by this. Thank you, by the way, for putting up the Ouroboros, because another one of the images that both Jung and the Steiner people use is this imagery of the snake biting its tail, and they use it to refer to the to the nodal cycle also. You know, so now what is actually happening there? And I've only just came upon this. I knew about it some years ago, but doing the research for this, the Steiner view, and if we go back to the, well, we don't have, no, we can just talk about it for a moment, that it's, if we look at this collectively, if we look at this as beyond the personal life story, then collectively, it's like a breath. So from the breath, the inhalation is at the south node to the north node, right? And then the release, the exhalation is from the north node to the south node. And so you have this whole process globally, but then remember, it's also happening individually. And individually, it's that the 4 stages that we just looked at. And you can also, for those that get beyond 90, you have a 5th one actually, you know, so there's another nodal return that happens. But related to the global events, then we could think of it as an in-breath and an out-breath. Now, many schools of astrology, including ours, use that framework that the south node is where we've coming from, and the north node is the place we're going toward. And I think you have something, a slide that shows these relationships.
Yeah, I wanted to make one comment, because
Please.
the Ouroboros, which is that dragon or snake biting its tail, I got really curious about that. So I just want to share some of what I found
Sure, yeah.
on Wikipedia. Basically, I mean, yes, it was definitely a Jungian symbol. And it meant infinity and wholeness, but it also meant individuation and oneness. Mm-hmm. It's that whole paradox of integrating and assimilating the opposites or the shadow, which is, again, how we come into oneness. So it's a feedback process of immortality as the Ouroboros slays itself to bring itself back to life. So that's where that dragon piece of it comes in. It's like the pre-ego dawn state of the individuated infancy experience of both mankind and the individual child coming into life, making that full circle. cosmologically, it illustrates the scales of the universe from the subatomic at the tail to the supergalactic at the head, where the macrocosm and microcosm meet to complete the circle. And that is so much about what we're learning about in this cycle. So, yes.
And it's always that remembering of the interweaving of what this refers to symbolically to the collective.
Yes.
And then how it relates to the individual. And
All
so
right.
both of those are concurrently happening. So you'll be experiencing the global expression of it, whether or not you yourself are in a nodal cycle or a nodal return, or how it applies to your own personal evolution.
Is this what you wanted up, Daniel? Was this a slide?
Yeah, right. So in this has more to do with the philosophical framework of initiation, that how we look at it within our paradigm. Keeping in mind that the South Node is like coming from somewhere, going somewhere. So the North Node on a personal axis, this is the highest level of being in alignment with your soul's intention. When the future self is reaching back to get your to get your attention, that should be to get your attention. It's bringing you to the third line there.
Attention.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you wanted?
Attention, rather than, yeah. No, sorry, Mary. The first word is correct to be intention, but then the next line it would be attention. The future self is reaching back.
Got it. Gotcha. Okay, I love it.
So what it is we're talking about here is that we always have to keep in mind the nodal axis is an axis, right? So the North Node always is, the South Node is always exactly opposite. Well, on the natal chart, there are also two axes, so you have the ascendant, descendant, midheaven, IC, also operates as an axis. So what we're looking at here is when the global nodal cycle aligns with your own personal axis. And I consider that to be of the highest tier of importance for the cycles we can go through in life. This is the time to work ceremonially with the nodal transit. The transit window is 3 months prior and 3 months following. So we actually come up with about a 6-month orb. And the reason there is some logic in that, which is that every year there are 2 eclipse seasons, right? So it's about 6 months in between. And much of that is also based upon the way we create initiation windows. So that if the planet is moving much slower, it's a wider orb. Like, Pluto can be sometimes almost 2 years. Jupiter is about 8 months. Saturn is 9 months. So this is about 6 months. So now I have to say, there are some times where it can be longer than 6 months. And that will actually occur when there is an eclipse present. Because, what happens when there's an eclipse, then the nodes will stay about the same degree for almost as long as 3 months. And so then you can have a slightly, wider orb. So this alignment that we're talking about, it's like where we can trust the guidance that's coming through. Hence that expression of it's like our future self is reaching down. I mean, there's plenty of times we think we're in harmony, we think we're getting guidance, but if it's in a Neptune cycle, or if it's in certain other kinds of cycles, it can actually be delusional. I mean, what we have is these dreams and visions that may not always be on track. But I always feel that when the nodes are, particularly when the nodal alignment with an axis, but also if the North Node is on some personal planet, And we intend, as we go through this conversation today, to give some examples, of the transits, how you can work with it if the North Node happens to be on something on your chart. But what I'm speaking of, what we are bringing forth right now, is this larger, most highest tier thing of when the nodal axis is in alignment with a personal axis. So the example would be, now, if the North Node is at, as we speak, well, no, today's the 16th, but in 2 days when it enters in, say 2959 Taurus, if you had a rising sign, 2029 Taurus, well, then that's one of the things I'm talking about. You've got the nodal axis exactly in aligned with your ascendant and descendant. Powerful, really pay attention to that one. It's not so much something dramatic is going to happen to you, but it's more like, this is when you open to vision, and you can trust the vision that's coming through.
And if you look, if you do have Taurus and Scorpio on your chart, so that it is working in behalf to take your soul forward, look back 19 years to see what was going on. Because you probably, if you're in that window, you probably have Saturn and Uranus doing a lot of tricks along with some of those same angles on your chart. And that can feel uncomfortable to see a lot of cycles coming up. But if you look at the nodal aspect of it and look back 19 years and go, wow, that was really an interesting time in my life, 94, 93, 94.
Right.
I made some great leaps in my career and in understanding the cosmos and the universe and how I relate to it. So yeah, I really invite you to do that, because it gave me a lot of comfort when I did it.
This is what you're bringing forth is really important in our techniques, which is that, and it works the best the older you are, actually. So if you're a little bit further down the road, I mean, this applies to the nodal cycles going back 19 years, but it also would apply to being in a Saturn cycle or a Jupiter cycle or Uranus, that you go back to the previous cycle that was similar. I'm not saying that it's always 100% the same thing, but it gives incredible clues relative to your phase of life. Like that quote that I just really love, history does not always repeat, but it very often rhymes. That we just, in the life process, it's like, okay, what did I go through at 18 to 19? What did I get as the vision, but I didn't have a chance to do it? So then at 37 to 38, oh yeah, that's what I wanted to see the world, but my parents forced me to get a job, or my parents forced me to go to this college I didn't want to go to, But at 37, but then you could have gone to the college you wanted to go to, and then you get exactly on track with what your mission and purpose statement is. But there's always a reiteration of it that happens at each nodal return. There is also the issue of the nodal reversal, which maybe we can get into that later if we have time in our presentation. This historical way of looking at it is really important, and then we can apply it to the world also. Now, this may be the point where it could be useful, Mary, if we just discuss a little bit about the Taurus Scorpio axis itself.
Yes, yes. It's a beautiful axis.
I mean, I personally think that the aspects and the timing and the timeline is probably the most important thing to go at first. But we're talking about a time frame from January until I think it's July of 2023, where the nodes will be in Taurus and Scorpio. So this is placing in the front lines of the, we could say the breath of the universe, the inhalation and the exhalation is about that axis, Taurus and Scorpio. And in our school, those two are in a category we refer to as self-exploration. And they are involution signs, so they have to do with earth and water. And I've always thought of those two as being very much organic, we could say. You know, they're really about being in a body. I mean, you kind of have to be in a body to do those two, you know. I mean, Sag and Gemini, the one we've just come out of, that can actually be logos and consciousness and information and discovery that way. You know, we're not saying good or bad about any of them, but when it's Taurus and Scorpio, then it's really about the emotions, the feelings, the body, security, how we're feeling. I mean, this is probably worth bringing this up, is that one of the projects of our school is in revisioning the mystery schools. You know, so a lot of times what you might think about the sun sign Taurus or the sun sign Scorpio is often its shadow, not the actual intention of what that school of life is about, right? So Scorpio is the one that goes deepest into the feeling function, yours, not anybody else, right? So it's your own direct experience, including the shadow material, of course, you know. And that's why, you know, Steiner and Rijar and Jung, you know, we're always strongly emphasizing the only way to get to heaven is to go all the way through hell first, right? You know, so it's like you've got to bring spirit all the way into matter. That's the whole thing about involution. And then Taurus, the revision of Taurus really is about the pleasure body, about the ability to enjoy what it is to actually have a physical incarnation, you know. So I mean, certain other mystery schools kind of want to, I don't know, not even be that concerned about our body, but Taurus and Scorpio entirely about our embodiment and the beauty way. That's Taurus, you know, or Scorpio, the passion way.
Right. So it's really about the sensing in the body, and then the feeling in the deep subconscious. I think that it really incorporates the deep intimacy in the Taurus end of it, and the beauty of paradise before the fall, as you always say, which I love. And that you think about Beltane and the fullness of springtime, because that's really the season of that really enveloping the most splendor in the body, of that springtime blossoming, compared to the death and rebirth of Samhain, and the preparing again to go through the shadow so that you can emerge at a higher level. That's again the Ouroboros.
It's actually the linking together. Beautiful to bring that up. It's the linking together of spring and fall.
Mm-hmm,
so if you're too attached just to an eternal spring, you're leaving out half, you know, which is the death and rebirth part, right? So that's a beautiful expression of the Ouroboros, the spring and fall, to spring and fall, which I think is what Taurus and Scorpio represents.
And how really magnificent that at the beginning of this switch into this axis, that we are also beginning the first Pluto cycle of the United States, the going into the shadow and releasing that shadow, so that it can be integrated, so that hopefully we have a new world that represents a higher level for humanity than where we've been.
Yeah, if you're looking at Pluto, and of course today, tomorrow is the time period of the Sun conjunct Pluto, in addition to the beginning of the Pluto return, and what we're talking about, Taurus and Scorpio here, is that in order to have a spring, things do have to be composted in the fall, you know, and so one requires the other. And again, the emphasis, this is very strongly on, if we put it this way, human 1.0. I mean, it's the whole being in the body, you know, organic humanity, water-based humanity, and so on. So it's not like data and information. It's clearly not digital. Let's put it that way, right? So there's the whole process of this next year and a half, emphasizing this global movement, the in-breath and the out-breath of the world, and then how does that relate to your own life, your own individual process? A lot of this that we're talking about here is really a revision to a certain extent of the understanding of those signs. And
I just want to, I what really struck me is that the Scorpio in the South Node, that surrendering attachment to the ideals, the beliefs, the perceptions that we've had really has to take place in order to respond to this new flow of energy. It's challenging for Scorpio to not fall into states of denial, repression, suppression, or control over the feeling realm. It's hard to let go, but this is a big letting go of maybe centuries or even 26,000 years of beliefs that have led us to where
maybe even larger than that. I'm suggesting it might be 12 times 12, right? So over 300,000 years. And plus the end of the Kali Yuga and all the rest of that. I mean, because at the end of the Kali Yuga, you have the deepest descent of spirit into matter. I've been thinking a lot about in the use of words, that I'm using the word involution and contrasting it from the word devolution. Now, there could actually be a heck of a lot of devolution that happens in Kali Yuga, and I spoke about that recently on the seminar on December 29th. But here we're speaking about actually quite a spiritual process, involution, and that's also itself an Ouroboros. That's also a snake biting its tail, where we begin as consciousness, we begin as spirit, and we have a journey down and in. According to people like Aurobindo, the journey must be that consciousness is taken all the way down into the deepest density, before it goes back up into like maybe a higher aspect of consciousness. So those two are really strongly related to each other. So involution is a spiritual thrust down and in, and that's the positive thing about being at the end of Kali Yuga. The fact that involution, the journey of spirit, has reached its destination, which and so if we can keep our consciousness, if we can keep our heart open in the deepest density, well, then we've actually accomplished the intention of involution.
And that's definitely on both a personal level and on the collective level, because there is such a falling apart of the pillars of society right now too. We're letting go of a lot of, on the bigger level, not just our own shadow, but the bigger shadow. So it's a perfect time for the end of the Kali Yuga, I think, because it's about both the composting, the rebirthing, and that's going to take us really close towards the end of the Kali Yuga, if in fact it does end in 24-25. So
right. And if we just use the precessional cycles, then we're clearly in the zone from 1962 to 2034. We're past the midpoint of that deepest point of the death, at the end and beginning of something, right? So, and that also shows up exactly with the idea that we're at the end of the fifth sun and moving into the sixth sun, according to Mayan and Hopi prophecy and things like that. What did you have what's the next slide you have up there?
Well, we have a couple choices here. We actually can talk about the nodal aspects for 2022.
Yes, let's go there.
Okay, all right, let's do that.
There aren't that many. So we're talking about the global aspect now. This is not the same as your individual cycles, which we'll get to next.
Is that up on your screen, Daniel?
It's good, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So there's this what we're talking about here is the transit of the North and South Node in 2022, and whether it's connecting with other planetary transits. And so we have here June 15th through 17th, Venus conjuncting the North Node at 22 Taurus. July 31st to August 2nd, Uranus and Mars conjunct the North Node, 18 Taurus. That should be quite fascinating, interesting, all right? Because that's also the time period of the final, almost an exact square of Saturn to Uranus. So Saturn is actually squaring that alignment at that time period. Those of many, I thought for a long time, wow, the third Saturn square Uranus in December, then it's finished. No, it actually comes back to almost 1 degree. So the relationship between Saturn and Uranus is ongoing in 2022. And so here we see one of the highlights, because the nodal axis aligns with that, with the Uranus and Mars conjunct happening, Mars in Taurus, with the North Node. So I think that's a major flashpoint. And then we have the time frame of November 1st through 6th, where we have Venus conjunct the South Node, 13 Scorpio, and then just a few, within the next few days in that same zone, Sun and Mercury conjunct the South Node. And that would be the time period when Venus is in the underworld.
And so we're getting some action there with the South Node in the past, and releasing again.
Right.
Right.
The underworld time is certainly a compost release time, surrender time. So that's interesting that that's connected to the South Node at that point.
Okay. Did you want to go to the nodal research?
No, let's just have a discussion about what do we suggest as navigation when you have a nodal transit to your own chart.
Okay.
Now, if any of you out there are in a nodal return, 18 to 19, those dates that we put up there before, or an in-between one, the nodal reversal. And there's certain specific dates for that. I mean, the nodal reversal is going to be around 27 to 28. And then you would have the time period at 46 to 46 and a half. Then there's another one 19 years later at about age 65. And so any of these time frames, and this is a really important teaching in our timeline course, then if you're in any of those time frames, then you're on the front lines, because essentially this nodal cycle that's currently happening is yours, right? So that's the important thing there. But even if you're not in a nodal return or a nodal reversal, you easily could have an important part of your chart connected to the transit of the nodes. Now, we indicated before, the highest tier of this would be if the nodal axis is on one of your personal axes, if it's on the midheaven or IC or on the ascendant descendant. However, see, that example is an axis with an axis. Now, the same thing can happen if this aligns with an opposition on your chart. I mean, if you have, if you were born at the full moon, and that full moon, was in one of these Taurus Scorpio degrees this year, then you can have the nodal alignment exactly with that Sun Moon opposition. But most of the time, the North Node will be aligning with something without the South Node being there. Like the North Node might hit your North Node might hit your Mars, or the North Node just will hit your Pluto, right? It'll align with those planets. And the meaning of the North Node hitting one of those points is going to be different than the South Node transit. aligning with one of those points. And the difference in how to interpret it is really based upon this overall idea. The South Node is, you're coming from there. It's something to do with, quote, the past. And the North Node is directing us toward a destination. So we could actually say that the North Node conjunction with something is progressive. It's a third movement of the symphony issue. It's a beacon taking us to our goals. It's not as overwhelmingly magical as the alignment with an axis, but it's still something to trust. You know, so if you have the North Node on Venus, the highlight is pay attention to Venus, and you're now having an opportunity to tune into a guidance for how to use your Venus. You know, it's a directional pointer toward your destiny, right? While if it's with the South Node, and remember here as we're discussing this, it's not good, bad. It's like North Node, oh, that's a good one. The South Node, that's a bad one. No, but it's still a testing ground if it's with the South Node. You know, so there's an inquiry. If the South Node is there, we could think of it as, are we having right use of that planet? How is it serving current life purpose? Or is there still something that needs to be resolved from the past, right? Now, I mean, there's examples of this that I've seen many times where maybe the South Node is with Venus or the South Node is with Mars, and you will actually meet someone from your past. Now, people will say, what do you mean past? How far back? Well, I mean, sometimes it will be like you connect with your first relationship, or, you know, so you meet an old friend of yours that you haven't been in touch with for a long time. But it also very much can have to do with meeting somebody from even further back, you know, so past life connections and that kind of thing. Now, as I say, it's a testing ground because you could actually fall into the debris or the trap is indicated from something from the past. You know, so South Node connections are like clearing the past. I know that you are involved with this. We've talked about this. It's sort of like the ancestral thing. You know, like the clearing of our ancestral wounds, and the South Node in alignment with important parts of the chart. I mean, good grief, like South Node with the Moon. Boy, is that I think that's you there, isn't it? South Node with the Taurus Moon.
Well, also, yeah, when the North Node is on your moon, isn't that more like Jupiter on the moon and harvesting and bringing in the best of the moon qualities, so you can incorporate the past?
It's enthusiastic moving forward, yeah.
Right, you can incorporate the past for new ways in the future, and that's like what we always said about you don't just cancel the old world, you bring in what was best about the old world, and that's important. That's very important. Especially because we're living in a cancel culture. And then if the North Node happens to hit your Mercury, is the sign that the North Node and Mercury are in, is that the leading edge for your life purpose right now? Is that the way you would interpret it?
Well, if that was the only thing there, I mean, it's always in combination with other factors, but kind of like the North Node on a planet, it's sort of like when you're in a synodic return or a planetary return. It's letting us know what is on the front lines. You know, that's the thing to awaken to more. But if we go back to the South Node, another indication of whether it's right use is that, and this is connecting to this issue of healing the ancestral wounds, is that in some cases, the South Node in alignment with a planet is the opportunity for a soul retrieval. It's like connecting to something that had been blocked. if you catch what I mean, you know, so that, I mean, if the moon or one of the inner planets has a lot of Saturn or Pluto, or there's been a lot of things blocking it, culturally even, then the alignment with the South Node can give an opportunity to clear that. And so that would be shamanically referred to as a soul retrieval or a soul return. But then again, it could also be the other side of the story, you know, where you're having to face the fact that you've been just way too identified with that, you know. So then it ends up becoming the over-identification with the moon, like in the paradigm, you know, where always we look at a chart first to look at the moon as lineage, right? And then to be able to see whether it's serving the current life purpose or whether it's holding it back. I think there's flavor of that with the South Node. And this also applies to the different way, and I like how you brought in that it's more Jupiterian. This applies to the way we interpret the difference between a nodal return and a nodal reversal. Because the nodal return is more Jupiterian. It's like an entrance into a field of all possibilities, while the nodal reversal has sort of a flavor of Saturn. You know, it's like saying, pause and look. Are you on track? Are you going to be able to get to your life goals if you keep doing it the same way? You know, so there's a little bit of a Saturn flavor to the reversal. And that's much like what we're just talking about now. South Node conjuncting an inner planet, you know. So these are techniques about how to interpret it. And it's also like what we were saying before. The window of initiation is about 6 months, 3 months on either side of the exact target degree in minute. And then with that proviso that if there happens to be the transit of the node within an eclipse point, then it can actually be extended more. You know, you have to look maybe a little bit before, more than the 3 months or after, because at that point the degree stays the same for almost 3 months.
Right. And we have eclipses coming up in April. So, and yeah, in Taurus.
And actually, we could have put those dates on there. Actually, we talked about that in our look ahead to 2022 in the seminar we did. But it has to be stated here, it's not lost on us here, that the eclipses, there's 2 solar and 2 lunar. The lunars are beyond total. I mean, they're way beyond total. They're really long ones, while the solar eclipses are just partial. But the main issue here is that they are Taurus Scorpio. They're on the Taurus Scorpio axis, right? So we keep that in mind also, so that the eclipse seasons and the exact point of the eclipses are portals or major punctuation points in this larger cycle from January until July of 2023.
And I, you know, because if you've got a lot of stuff going on in Scorpio and Taurus, you could have, you could be impacted by where the nodes are right now, but then you could be more impacted if you've got exact or within the orbs of those eclipses, which is what, within how many degrees of the eclipse points? Is it 6 total?
I've actually seen that you can look at about 10 degrees. I mean, because when you look at an eclipse can happen. An eclipse can happen when there's about a 10-degree or less separation between where the sun and the moon is and what the exact degree of the node is. And so that if you have a full moon or a new moon within a degree or 2 of the node, then you definitely have a total eclipse. But if it's about 10 degrees, then you can have a partial eclipse. So I think about 10 degrees works, but the closer, obviously, the better. I think we pretty much covered all the main things, but I think we now do have time to. I want you to share your research. You know what you discovered when you looked at historically at the at this particular nodal time frame of the Taurus Scorpio.
Okay. Get back on center.
And this was kind of amazing because this is really bringing it right up to date here.
Well, yeah, it's very current. We're in that window of making that transition on the 18th. So the lunar nodes will be in Scorpio and Taurus, but we're kind of on the stepping over point. This is coincidence with natural disasters and severe weather, which when I looked at all of the dates for the past North Node in Taurus, North Node in Scorpio time periods, I found a lot of this. It's when the Dust Bowl began. There was a lot of severe weather going on. There were major droughts in India and other places during these times when the node is in Taurus, which is really about the Earth Mother. And so, just as we're kind of our shadows coming up and we're clearing things, I think the Earth herself is. So on January 15th, this past weekend, this underwater volcano that erupted off in the water itself, off the island of Tonga, was really quite significant. It had a massive eruption strength of an EV15, which is kind of a comparative Richter scale type index to the scale of the size of an explosion of a volcano when it erupts. The famous one, the last biggest one, was in 1886, and it was at an EV6. So we can kind of compare these things to see how that impacted the collective over the next months following it. So according to Wikipedia, this prior Krakatoa, is that how you say it? The eruption?
Actually, it's Krakatoa eruption.
Okay. It caused a volcanic winter, and the year following the eruption, and in the northern hemisphere, the summer temperatures fell 3/4 of a degree, which doesn't sound like a lot, but in a global way, it is a lot. The recorded rainfall that hit Southern California during that water year that came up from July of 1883 to June of 1884 in Los Angeles, they had 38.18 inches of rainfall, and in San Diego they had 25.97 inches, which is almost 20 inches of rainfall that was attributed to this eruption. So this current eruption could in fact be a perfect geological event to help cool the planet at a time when we're experiencing global warming. So during that event, the North Node was in Scorpio and the South Node was in Taurus, which is reverse of where we're at right now. Yeah.
No, I'm sorry. Sorry to interrupt. I can't help it. Hey, Lynn, what year did Pinatubo go off?
I think 1991.
1991. Okay. No, there's a huge volcanic eruption here that cooled things for a couple of years also. And I need to see whether that might have been in the same time frame.
I'm almost sure 1991.
93 was the last North Node one. It could have been the previous South Node one. And Daniel, I was actually headed for the Philippines when that volcano went off. I was in Hong Kong. I got up. The red lights were on my phone. I was told all of my flights were canceled. And when I got to breakfast, I found out why.
Oh, wow. Interesting. Huh.
I ended up going less than a week later. I went to Bangkok to take care of business and then went to the Philippines. But boy, I got the full brunt of that. They couldn't take off or land because of the volcanic ash in the air was impacting the engines of the airplane.
Right. That
Yeah.
was happening at Mount Agung also a number of times. But this of course is the biggest one in more recent times, and it is, I think, worth noting. I'm actually hoping from a lot of these resources that we have shared with you that you will take it upon yourself maybe to do some of your own research. We're certainly not trying to say that the only major thing that will happen in this lunar nodal cycle is volcanoes, but it might be, let's keep looking at this, because considering the fact the south node is in Scorpio, it's like a whole lot of composting is maybe coming up, right? That's in order to create a new Garden of Eden. So
Yep. And that composting is from the past. So
Right.
there's
Right,
lots
right.
of that to clear. That's really beautiful. We are at our hour time frame.
Yeah, I think we've gone through everything that we desired to do. So hopefully this has been a useful exploration for those of you that get a chance to see this, and definitely feel free to communicate with us in the school any insights that you might have from what we brought up here. And I look forward to seeing you again next month. So, and thank you, Mary, so much for helping out on this. And this has been, I think, a great inquiry.
It's been fun. And look back to 93 and see where you were at. And hopefully it was a good time in your life and you'll get to see some parallels. Thank you
And
so
if you're in a
much,
nodal
Daniel.
return or one of these time periods, and if you haven't had some kind of a session with recently with one of our shamanic astrologers, this be a good time, right? So anyway,
That's
see you.
true. All right. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Have a happy US and Pluto. We're coming through it.
And full moon,
Full
enjoy
moon.
this, the Magi full moon. All right, see you. Okay,
Thank
next
you.
time. Thanks, Mary.
Bye-bye.